What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast, as always on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, pardon me, with 95.7 The Game. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. It is all about the NFL draft. Marc, it is finally over. We are through. The 49ers have their picks. They have their 9 guys. And before we dig in, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, long weekend. A lot going on, of course, in the Bay Area. You have the NFL draft, which I was looking at some recent numbers, ratings. The NFL draft ratings were way up this year. In the little bubble in the Bay Area, a little bit hard to believe because so many people are focused on the Warriors right now. But NFL draft coverage at an all-time high. We're excited to get our post-draft episode going, our reaction episode. I'm looking forward to it. I'm doing well overall, Evan. Long weekend, but getting back to the grind. I'm looking forward to it. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, got a little bit of sunshine down in San Diego this weekend.
Nice.
So enjoyed being back in Southern California. A lot of Mexican food and actually, there was a lot of people. I was at a wedding this weekend. There was a lot of people that were locked into the NFL draft. So even though you're right, like the 49ers didn't have a whole lot of action going on apart from a trade that we'll dig into in just a few minutes, it was pretty, I would say, magnetic for a lot of people. And I do think the amount of action that surrounded both the top of the draft, anytime there's quarterbacks taken in the top 5, especially multiple of them, I think you're going to see a lot of people and the numbers go up. But also, there were a ton of trades, both the first, second, and especially in the third round. So, Marc, I kind of get whereas maybe Bay Area fans weren't exactly locked into this draft. I do think that there was reason for the viewership to be as high as it was.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of, there was so much talk about the quarterbacks. And I know something you brought up our last episode was the S2 cognition scores and how that might have an impact. Obviously, CJ Stroud still went 2 overall. But I mean, the Texans picked 2 and 3. I mean, there's a gigantic trade right off the bat, which was very exciting. And there were so many trades, too many to even keep track of. And that's what makes drafts fun like this, where you have all this movement. And this draft certainly did not lack that. So I think that's part of the reason why not only did it attract people originally because of the quarterback drama, but it kept people around because of all those trades that were happening.
Well, and one trade for the 49ers did happen. That's how they got their first guy. I do have to give you credit before we actually get into the players, though, Marc, because of our sort of hot takes or predictions pre-draft. I believe yours were both extremely close, if not spot on with one of them. They did trade up. They did not trade up to the second round, but they did trade up to get closer to the second round, and they also potentially got their kicker of the future. So I was off the beaten trail, not with one, but 2 of my hot takes, and I got to give the floor to you.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say my 2 hot takes were probably not as hot as your 2. Mine were probably a little more straightforward. You went for all the glory. It didn't quite work out for you. I took the easier route, and it did seem to work out for me. But yeah, you're right. I mean, their first overall draft pick was Ji'Ayir Brown, the safety from Penn State. They moved up a handful of picks to get him in the 3rd round, and then they picked the first kicker off the board as well. And my take relating to the kicker was they are going to draft their kicker that will start in the regular season this year, and they will be relying on to make a number of really big kicks in the playoffs. And we will get to the kicker, but you don't draft a kicker in the 3rd round, Evan, unless the plan is to play him and to start him. So I think that one I can already check off as correct, but I guess only time will tell for sure.
No doubt. And first selection, Ji'Ayir Brown, safety out of Penn State. They sent 3 picks up to the Minnesota Vikings, and that was kind of something that we had talked about, the fact that they have all this draft capital. They went in with 11 picks. They made 9 selections, and this safety, Ji'Ayir Brown, is supposed to be a guy that, a lot is sort of riding on. I would say that my initial thoughts about him as well as the class was I was a bit surprised. And I know that it's kind of hard to draw glowing admiration when you're picking in the 3rd round and beyond to start. But I was a little surprised that safety was the first place that they went to, especially for a guy that at least from what I've seen, from what I've read, is in a little bit of a Talanoa Hufanga mold in the sense that he's a bit undersized. He's not fast as far as his measurables are concerned. I think you're in a 4.65, but he has intelligence. He can read offenses, and he plays with more speed in game. So I'm excited to see this guy play because didn't get to watch a ton of Big Ten football, but apparently this guy has really good instincts. A couple of comps I've seen have been in kind of the Micah Hyde range for those familiar with Buffalo safety Micah Hyde. Also formerly of Green Bay, but this was a guy that I was surprised that was taken in the spot that he was by the 49ers specifically.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, we can talk about my hot take hits. One of my less hot takes was the first pick was going to be a tackle. Not only was their first pick not a tackle, they didn't draft the tackle. So I'm with you. I'm a little surprised that their first pick was a safety, but it just shows you this was a guy that they liked, and the Niners haven't really put much draft capital into that position in a really long time. In fact, the last time they used a pick that high in the third round or a day 2 pick on a safety was 2015 when they drafted Jaquiski Tartt. So it has been a really long time since they've put this much draft capital in a safety. You mentioned Talanoa Hufanga. He was drafted a couple of years ago, but that was a 5th round pick. So they haven't used this, this high of draft pick, this much draft compensation, this much of an asset to draft at that position in nearly a decade. And it tells you, one, that they did use it on that position and that they traded up to acquire him. It was a guy that they really, really liked. Now, with that said, I'm not sure he's going to see the field for many defensive snaps this year, but you mentioned the Talanoa Hufanga mold. Well, do you remember what Talanoa Hufanga did his rookie year?
Yeah,
Become a
special teams.
special teams ace. He had the recovery of the blocked punt against Green Bay in the postseason that ultimately won the Niners that game. Now, he didn't block the punt, but he was there on special teams. He recovered the punt in the end zone and will forever be remembered by Joe Buck screaming Hufanga at the top of his lungs for the rest of his career with the 49ers. And then what happened in Hufanga's second year, this most recent year? He became an All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. I'm not saying that I expect that to happen for Ji'Ayir Brown, be a Pro Bowler in his second year in the NFL, but it seems like his trajectory should follow that similar path where plays special teams as a rookie, and then after that, the 49ers turn, kind of the starting safety spot over to him because Tashaun Gipson, they re-signed him for just one more year. His contract is up after this coming season, and that opens up a starting safety spot. And who is the likely fill-in at this point? Seems like their third-round rookie from this year, which next year will be a year ago. And I would be shocked if that isn't the 49ers' plan for this guy. Work him into special teams this year, and then hope he's good enough to play as your starting safety a year from now.
No, exactly. That's the path. Hufanga sat behind Jaquiski Tartt and primarily contributed on special teams, and then was able to find that starting role. Of course, once Jimmy Ward's injury also played into that as well. But I mean, this guy Brown is certainly going to have a chance probably in a year to prove himself. If not this year, should he be able to earn snaps, or you never know, a guy goes down. He's flexible along with a lot of the picks that the 49ers took. Of course, the next guy and really the biggest name that caught people's eyes was the kicker, Jake Moody, who Rich Eisen was glowing about, of course, during the actual selection. Michigan Wolverine. He is a big-time kicker in college, and you don't often see too many kickers be taken in the top 3 rounds. So this guy, number one, I'm sure is very good. 49ers are very confident that he's good. But number 2, Mark, he had better damn well be good if you are going to take a kicker in the 3rd round. And this guy's played in big games. He's obviously played for a successful team, and he's got a big leg. But this is something that, unless you're going to envision this guy being on your roster for a very long time, it is a bit perplexing to see someone being taken at that position this high. And And maybe it's a situation where the 49ers felt like there wasn't anyone else on the board at that time that was worth that position, and you have a chance to get your kicker of the future. Right now, you're a bit, um, you know, depleted at that position, even though you went out and traded for a guy. It confused me a little bit, but of course, I guess the question becomes, how else are you going to fill that void?
Yeah, once I got over the initial shock of a kicker in the third round, it made a little bit more sense to me. First, some raw numbers, some statistics about drafting kickers this early. Um, so the 99th overall pick, the 49ers drafted kicker Jake Moody out of Michigan. The highest a kicker has gone since Roberto Aguayo out of Florida State went 59th overall in 2016 to the Buccaneers. That has gone down as one of the worst picks in NFL draft history. Roberto Aguayo, 59th overall, a kicker, lasted one season in the National Football League and has not been heard from since. Terrible, terrible, terrible pick. This is a pick, Evan, where he better be your starter for at least 5, 6, 7 years. Because if he's not, it's a waste of a third round pick at 99 overall. And I can absolutely guarantee you the 49ers are incredibly confident that he will be that guy. Because again, you only make this pick if you are 100% certain. And let's break down kind of the math of this pick. Because the 49ers had this pick in the third round. They did not have a fourth round pick. Their next pick was in the fifth round. There were a lot of mock drafts that had Jake Moody going as early as the fourth round, some into the fifth round. But the likelihood, Evan, the very real possibility is if the Niners did not pick him here in the third round, he would not have been available to them in the fifth round when their next pick was. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't have traded up into the fourth round or, earlier into the fifth round and gone to get him. But if you feel so certain that he is your kicker of the future and you are so confident in his leg that you are, again, certain that he is your guy, I don't really see the negative in maybe reaching a little bit, considering you're worried he's not going to make it to your next pick. I know there's just a lot of fearful fans out there saying, how can you possibly pick a kicker in the third round? It's a mistake. It hasn't really worked. Understood. I get it. But I think the Niners were so much more confident in this guy than any of the other kickers that were potentially draftable that they figured it's worth it. It's worth a bit of a reach to get our guy and fill really the last remaining starter spot on our roster. Once I considered all of that, this pick made a little bit more sense to me.
Well, it also made more sense when you saw the New England Patriots take a kicker and trade up to get a kicker 13 picks later. So potentially Jake Moody would not be on the board. I mean, and even though I know they were able to, take Cameron Latu a couple of picks later in the third round, maybe they felt like there was a team behind them or a pick behind them that could be grabbed and scooped up. And I also do wonder just how much inside the war room, when you're seeing the amount of trades being processed like at rapid pace, especially in the first couple of rounds, if there's a guy that you have your eye on, and like you said, you're bringing back 19 of 22 starters from an NFC title game, the kicker is basically the biggest glaring one at this point outside of maybe right tackle, which we can get to in a sec. I don't necessarily blame them for potentially reaching this spot, but it does give a lot of people pause. I am curious, though, what you think about the non-selection of an offensive lineman, though.
Surprised me. Again, I thought that their first pick was going to be a tackle. And maybe another one or two picks was going to be a tackle, but they didn't make a single tackle. My first thought was, okay, they absolutely are confident in Colton McKivitz that he's their starting right tackle, not only for this year, but potentially in the future. Or they feel some way about, Jalen Moore or some of their other, young offensive linemen who we've seen, here and there at times filling in. I'm surprised they didn't go and just try to get some more depth. Now, I will say, and something we could talk about later, there are still free agents out there, Evan, and the Niners did make some news this weekend by moving some money around. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'm surprised they did not draft an offensive tackle, even if they're so confident in McKivitz that he's their guy this year and potentially beyond. I'm a little surprised they didn't at least beef up some depth and draft one or two guys that they thought had some high upside. But they must feel really confident about their offensive line group.